If you've ever been to one of our Young Living farms, and we sure hope you get that chance, maybe you notice bees buzzing around the lavender. Don't be afraid of their stingers, they are just part of a healthy ecosystem. Gary Young paid attention to the bees, and we have exciting research just published on these pollinators. Happy Earth Day from our farms to your homes. Hello and welcome to Young Living's podcast, The Wild Drop. My name is Jacob Young, your host. Young Living is the world leader in producing and distributing premium essential oils, and this podcast will provide you with drops of information about Young Living, including stories, history, product information, lots of little fun facts, and even more. Well, Tyler, welcome back to the podcast. We're always happy to have you back. You have so much knowledge and expertise, and you're just brilliant, and you love to do research, which is what we love to do here at Young Living, so we're happy to have you back. I've heard bees and other projects have kept you busy. What you been up to?
Well, thanks for having me back. It's always good to be here, and happy to do research here. Yeah, I've been really busy this last year, mostly looking at aromatic plants, of course, essential oil profiles, doing analytical research. But yeah, bees have kept me really busy as well. This last year, we dove into a couple of local lavender and bee-related research projects, and we've found some interesting findings so far. Some of them are pending for publication. Others we hope to expand on this next year with research, but hopefully we'll, describe those a bit more and get into those today.
Yeah. So for those of you that are listening to this for the very first time, we started this bee research a few years ago now, and it's a continuation off of kind of something that my dad recognized way, way back in the day when Young Living first started. And Colby Olds, who's our director of the foundation currently, came to me one day and he's like, "Why did the buzzy bees visit our lavender here at GHQ?" And all I could think was, well, they're bees. They pollinate and they collect pollen for their young. And that's all I really knew as far as bees were concerned. And he's like, "Yeah, but there's got to be more to it." And in the back of my head, I'm like, well, I remember my dad saying something that if something is to ever happen to the lavender, to look to the bees. And years and years and years ago, there was almost kind of like a plague that swept lavender in France. And one of the problems with this plague is that the bees weren't helping with pollination, and lavender is not very good at self-pollination. And so because of that, the lavender had started to dwindle and die out. When the bees came back, then that kind of helped revitalize the lavender, as well as making sure to have good population lavender seeds and good growth and watching it from the beginning. But not to get too deep into that, we continued kind of that research and kind of that question and ended up meeting Dr. Joseph Wilson of Utah State University, who is a entomologist, correct, and looks directly at bees mostly, all sorts of different bees, native, outside of the states as well. And so it kind of began this just journey of what can we expect to find with bees and lavender, and that's where we are today. And so we have one paper published, which has been fascinating and exciting, and that's on the research that we did in Mona. And would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Mona is a very interesting farm. You know, I think a lot of times when we think of farms, we think of one or two crops, but Mona is really diverse. There are over a dozen crops that grow there at different scales for sure. You have show rows with, I think, over 10 different aromatic plant species. You have larger populations of Melissa, clary sage, and then much larger populations of goldenrod, and then the largest of lavender. So really the investigation was really taking a survey. Which bee species are present here in Mona, and are there differences between each crop that grows there? And findings were really, I think, surprising, if nothing else. One of the things that Joe Wilson looked at was, hey, in this region, which is kind of on the border of a desert / next to the mountains, there really is not enough data of which bee species are there. But the data that's out says that really there's a lot of diversity in bee species. Yeah, it's always hard to remember statistics, so I brought that paper with me. But looking at it, so in that study in Mona, there were 68 bee species identified in 22 different genera. So, broadly related bee species, but then, 68 different bee species. And when we think of bees, we usually think, like you say, bumblebee, maybe one species, honeybee, another species. But really, there are multiple bumblebee species. There really is only one European honeybee.
Yeah.
But there are thousands of bee species across the world. So to find on one farm that really isn't that big, find 68 different bee species shows that we're doing something right. There's a lot of diversity there.
Yeah, that was extremely fascinating to me. I remember when I first met with Dr. Joseph Wilson, him kind of saying, well, there's actually thousands of different bee species. And I was like, what do you mean? I thought there was like the bumblebee and the honeybee.
Right.
Because that's all people think that exist are just the honeybee and the bumblebee. And there's some bees that are no bigger than your fingernail. And it was fascinating to, when we started capturing them and then, collecting them, just to see all the different varieties, the shapes, the colors, their different antennae. And it was really, really cool to see. And a number that's also even more fascinating on that paper was all the bees that visited Lavender were somewhere just over 30% of the total bee population within that county itself.
Exactly.
Which is so great to see that our fields are bringing the bees in. And obviously, we have to do some more conclusive research, but I would like to say it's because our fields are organic. They're natural. We don't do pesticides. We also give them natural habitat berms around the perimeter of the lavender to protect them and to give them a place to be, because we know they play such a vital role within the ecosystem of our plants. More research to come on that as well. So
yeah, but I think you put it really well that, when you look at the bee species diversity, you can tie a lot of conclusions to that and tie that into our practices. Looking at these bee species, most of them house or nest in the ground. Well, if we were a farm that sprayed chemicals, that tilled all the time, that's obviously going to destroy their homes. But the fact that we don't do those things, that allows bees to really stay in an area, make a home there, and really we can help them, they can help us.
Yeah.
So it's a great, great finding.
One of my hypotheses and one of Dr. Wilson's hypothesis is we actually studied a bunch of different lavender fields in France. And we noticed the ones that were maintained, so like tilled and were weeded and sprayed and all of that, had little to no population of any type of bee diversity. And all that we really saw were honeybees that had been planted by local honey collectors, makers, I don't know what you call them. Yeah. And we noticed the fields that were natural, which were the young living fields and the partner fields, had way more diversity and way more bees. And so I almost wonder if it would be similar here. I don't know of any other lavender farms here in Utah, but it would be cool to kind of collect and do that data and see if it matches with what we've seen in France. I'm almost pretty certain it would be the same, if not identical.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I think that's just kind of a true testament to us being farmers and making sure that we are using every aspect of farming when it comes to bees that most people wouldn't think plays such a big role. But there's so much more that we want to do with this bee research. We're not just done here with lavender, and I don't think our research is necessarily concluded here. I think there's more that we can do, and I think it'd be great if you kind of shared a little bit more about what you're wanting to do or how you think it'd be great for us to expand on that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think once you jump into a project like this, you answer one or two questions, well, inevitably you have 2 or 3 more questions afterwards that you want to ask and you want to answer. And so that's exactly what we're doing. So this last year, another project that we did was, we were wondering which bee species not only are present, but are some better pollinators than others? Meaning, are they coming just for the nectar treat, or are they actually pollinating, leading to the production of seed for that population lavender? And we did collect a lot of data for that. That study has not been published yet. We're still going through the data because I think we took something like 2,500 different photos, going through everything, sifting through everything. Yeah. It takes a while.
I know for our paper that we published, there were close to about 900 photos. And one thing when it comes to part of this paper is you have to go and identify genus, species, and then location, and then color, what lavender plant it was on, and we all have to do that manually. There's not a automation system for this. And so Dr. Wilson, yourself, and a few others that were involved in this project, we were like, okay, you take 50, and we'll just kind of get through this.
It's fun work, but it's
work
monotonous.
through it. Yeah. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I thought that was a pretty brutal part of the paper, was doing that.
But as far as that study goes, we're hoping to publish those findings soon, so stay tuned for that. But one of the questions we started to answer but really didn't have enough data to answer was, how do bees affect the essential oil profile of lavender? And so what we did in that study is we took two groups of lavender. And mind you that this is population lavender grown from seed. And so one of the groups, we put these netted cages over them. So we excluded pollinators the entire season. And the other group, we left open to pollination. And then at the end of the season, before the seed was produced, we would go and collect the lavender, distill it, analyze the oil. You helped with that process. And looking at that, the profile is actually surprisingly different between the two groups, one that wasn't pollinated and one that was. But really, since we are dealing with population lavender, so non-clonal lavender, we expect there to be an inherent difference from plant to plant. I mean, that's the beauty of nature, right?
Yeah.
You have the same species, but really there's inherent differences, subtle differences from plant to plant. And we expect that to be visible in the essential oil profile and aroma.
That also makes it even more difficult with some research because there's so many inconsistencies in a way. When you're trying to do research like this to collect a number or some type of statistic, you're looking for an outlier. And the things that you would find more easily, the best way to explain this is, say we had colonal lavender, like perfume lavenders. Colonal lavender is exact with everything. Every single plant that you see is almost genetically identical because it's a clone of something that's been taken already. And so we know that the output or the yield rate of that oil, the constituents, the components, everything is going to be almost identical each time.
Right.
And so if we were to do it with colonal lavender, we would know, like, we would see that inconsistency of, wow, oh, this one with bees, like, look at the spike right here, where this one, there was no spike. So it would have been a lot easier if we could have done it on colonal, whereas because Mother Nature is consistent in many ways, but every plant is so unique and so different with its own DNA, it was a lot harder to spot these inconsistencies or these variables. And I think you're coding it a little bit too nicely, because what we had to do was run it through the gas chromatography machine, which is what we call the GC. And at certain times and different levels, we know that, okay, so this drop of oil going through what is called the coil at this specified distance and time, we expect to see, oh, this isolate or this compound. And we know it based off all the tests that we've done to have this amount. And then we would compare that versus one that was pollinated or not pollinated and see if it was more or less or the same. And that's how we were able to identify the profile differences. But once again, there's no automation system for this. It's all manual. And trust me when I say you could mess this process up so easily. I don't know how you guys do it. But when Tyler had me come down, he's like, okay, we know at this time we can expect XYZ or whatever it was. We can expect this amount for it. And then you have to find it within our Wikipedia or our encyclopedia source of like constituents and isolates and
I like Wikipedia.
and the
That's a good
amount.
term.
Yeah. And then you have
Compoundopedia.
and then you have to match it and make sure that amount is similar to all the tests that we've done in the past. And then you write the number and the amount. Oh my goodness. It's so easy to mess that up. And we also know that based off all the studies that we've done, that these compounds, isolates, and everything kind of go from A to Z. Mm-hmm. So we know at this time period, this one should always show up. And towards the end, this one should always show up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was also a super difficult process because I was stressing out, making sure not to mess up the numbers, because at the end, you should have 100%. And if you didn't write the right number down, you're like, oh, 99.98, got to go back through the whole list and figure out where you messed up.
You did really well, though. It is meticulous, but once again, pretty fun work.
Yeah.
And you are right. Maybe I am downplaying a little bit, but what we ended up doing in these two groups of lavender is we had 20 plants in each. And like you said, if we had clonal lavender, that would probably be a big enough data set to come to some conclusions. And even though we had one control group, one experimental group here, it really, with population lavender, we need something like 100 plants in each group. So we'll do the research again this next year, and hopefully, we'll see the same pattern and we'll be able to draw a conclusion from it.
Yeah.
To really understand how are bees impacting the essential oil profile. We know that they impact the future generations of lavender by producing seed, but how do they impact that essential oil as well?
Yeah. We met with a professor in Germany on our way back from France, and he was doing something very similar with apple trees, actually. So he had a control group and an experimental group of different apple tree farms that allowed bees to come on and one that didn't allow bees to come on. And I noticed the one where bees did come, the apple trees grew better, quicker, produced more apples, and the apples were sweeter, actually. And so my hypothesis and Dr. Wilson's hypothesis was that should almost transfer over to everything else that we see, because bees play such a huge part in production of crops and harvests and all sorts of stuff. So I would almost think that it would do the same, or if not be similar, to what we can expect to find with lavender. Maybe not a sweeter profile, but
a different profile.
A different profile, yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that we found with aromatic plants is that, we typically think of these aromatic compounds, essential oil compounds, from a human perspective. How do we use them? How can they benefit our lives? But if you kind of turn that around and say, how do these compounds benefit the plant? Well, it's a completely different perspective. When you have a young seedling of lavender that has no flowers, the leaves produce a certain type of compound, or compounds, I should say. And then as the plant's growing up and it needs to produce seed, well, some of those compounds are produced to enhance pollinators to come and pollinate.
Yeah.
And then once they're pollinated, they'll slightly change their profile quite often because they don't want to be eaten by deer or elk or whatever else. And so they're producing these compounds for their own benefit, to enhance pollinators, to keep animals, herbivory, from eating the plants. And so really, when you distill, how you distill, it all impacts the essential oil profile.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we've kind of done this with lavender, we were talking a little bit before recording of how Young Living plans to kind of expand this research with bees specifically. And obviously we don't want to give too much away, and we're still working on research, so we kind of have to be vague with this.
Sure.
But if you kind of just want to throw out some hints as to what people can expect for the future and how this project and this research is expanding, and not just, oh, we've done it, so
yeah,
this is it.
Not a one and done.
Yeah.
Really what we've done so far is taken that baseline data, which bees are present. And really the broader questions then are, why are they present? What do they do? What impact do they have on the farm, on these plants? And what do we need to do to adapt our agricultural practices to bring more bees, to bring more diversity? Because really, we view all of our farms as an ecosystem. Bees are very much part of that ecosystem. And so if we can have more diversity at our farms, really just mimic nature, well, we want to enhance those practices. So those are kind of the immediate things that we've been tackling so far. But as for the future, we want to look at how do bees impact the essential oil profile, because we're an essential oil company. But next is really moving to other locations and asking different questions. So in Idaho, as you know, we have 2 tree farms, or specifically conifer farms. So conifer trees, think of firs, spruce. That's primarily what we have, right? Mm-hmm. Blue spruce, grand fir.
Pine.
Yep. They're wind pollinated. They don't depend on any pollinator, butterflies, bees. But if you look at a lot of the bee species that are native to those areas, they do interact with those conifer trees a lot. There's a group of researchers that have found that they'll collect resin from those conifers and they'll use them to build their nests. And so they're continually interacting with them. They'll also burrow in dugout holes in these trees. So we want to understand, even though these trees are wind pollinated, how are bees interacting with these tree species, and how do they benefit them?
Yeah.
Because once again, it is an ecosystem.
Are they just using the trees as a home, or is there more going on with it? That's what we want to find out.
And typically in nature, it goes both ways, right? The bees may benefit, but how do the trees benefit from the bees as well?
Yeah.
And I'm sure it goes both ways.
Yeah, because you definitely don't want some type of life force or something else that's on your home or on you, and you're not benefiting from it as well. So just like the sucker fishes on the sharks, it's
Two-way relationship.
Yep, it's got to be the same way.
And another project that we're looking at expanding is taking this research down to Ecuador, which, as you know more than anybody, it's a beautiful farm.
Yeah.
Some of the interesting things that researchers have found in South America is that bees that pollinate orchids, one of the things that they'll often do is they'll kind of roll around, or specifically male bees will roll around in aromatic compounds of these, aromatic flowers, almost like they're making a cologne, and then they'll use that to entice female bees. And so one of the things that we want to look at is which bee species are doing that, and what do those aromatic, I guess we'll call them cologne profiles, look like?
Yeah.
And do some lead to better mating success than others? Those type of questions. So really interesting, and something, once again, our company that's so heavily invested into analytical research is well suited to do.
That is fascinating. I didn't know that part. And I think bees are doing a much better job at attracting females that way. Because I know for elk and how they attract females with their scent profile is not as pleasant as that. I won't say it on the podcast, but if you're curious, go look up, what they do to attract females with scent. It's quite gross, but I think bees do a much better job.
Much better. Maybe there's something we can learn from this too, as humans.
Absolutely. Obviously, with Young Living, one of our biggest focuses with everything that we do is sustainability. And we focus so much on that we've been awarded numerous awards at numerous different locations, including here at headquarters, for sustainability. And the reason why we focus on it so much is because it's kind of one of our principles here. And my dad, being a farmer that he was, he always said, everything we have, you cannot take for granted because it's not an unlimited source. Right. And so we have to do our part to ensure and maintain that whatever we take today, we can provide for someone else tomorrow. And by doing that, the best way to put this into context is with our conifer farms, up in Idaho. For, I don't know the exact number, but, and these are just numbers that I'm kind of making up because it varies each year with the spring planting that we do. But for every 1,000 that we take, we try to plant 10,000 the next year, just so that it is always there for the next generation. So this is something that will not ever run out. And so this project was really special to me because I feel like it really hit home with that sustainability of, if something is to ever happen with the bees, is something going to happen to the lavender? Obviously we know that without bees, we're going to lose a lot of our crops and everything. And so we need to do our best in making sure that every single piece that comes into play with our practices, our farming, that it ties all together with sustainability. And so if that means we need to protect the bees or provide them with better homes, whatever it may be, this is kind of what we're wanting to gather from this research. And what's so amazing is with all of science, it started with one question and continued because my father had started working on that and kind of asked a similar question of like, okay, so why is the lavender dying? And digging more into it, noticing, well, where are the bees? There's no bees. And so I think it's just awesome to just take a step back from the world. And it might seem like a dumb question, but sometimes those questions can lead to all sorts of different things. And that for me is why this project specifically is so important to me, because it's part of our core. It's part of who we are. It's part of all of our principles and everything that we do. So I think that's super awesome. And obviously you're watching and listening to this on Earth Day, and there's a lot more videos that are going to be posted about this. I'm doing an interview later about the bees as well. And so I know I would love to hear kind of your perspective on Earth Day, why it's important, sustainability, and why it's important to focus on stuff like this. From your perspective, Tyler.
Yeah, the last couple of Earth Days, the projects that I've been directly involved in, specifically on that week of Earth Day, is specifically at our Mona farm, building up what I like to call little heaven islands or little oases, where you take these little corridors that are maybe just directly adjacent to, a field of lavender. And what we did is we started taking out these plant species that were on that little plot that were not supposed to be here. They're not aromatic, they're not native species. And what we did is we allowed more room for the native plants that have always been here, whether it's grasses, sedges, bushes, trees, flowering plants. And just by taking out those non-native invasive plant species, the native ones started thriving. And some of Joe's research and your research in Mona specifically found that in and around these little oases, there was a huge diversity of bee species and other pollinators as well. And so what I like is seeing that Young Living acknowledges that we have great farm practices, but that there's room to always improve. If these little oases, if investing in those, having native plant species there that don't bring us essential oils, but they make a more complete and diverse ecosystem and a healthier farm, well, then we should invest in those and we should have more of them. And so seeing that perspective of we're doing a great job right now, but we can always improve, that really is close to my heart. And anytime that I can do research that really ties into that, I'm all for it. That really is my bread and butter.
Yeah, and I'm happy you're so aligned with everything else that we do here. I feel like we have so many like-minded people in pushing and protecting the earth that we have, in whatever way that may be. And something so small like removing smaller invasive species from your garden or wherever it may be to help, native grasses, sedges, whatever it may be, thrive is all about what we can do and why we should do it to just keep this earth going for the next generation. And I think it's also being a leader and leading by example and showing the world why it's so important to do what we do. And hopefully everybody else can kind of start adopting similar practices that we have. I know when Dr. Wilson came and visited our farms for the first time, he was absolutely blown away and astonished by how little we do as far as, with the crops. He's like, oh, you don't till, you don't really weed, like you're really natural as it gets. And he's like, that's great for all of the little bees and flies and everything else, everything that's coming around here, because it just improves the life out here, and it probably improves your fields and your crops as well, which we obviously already know. But I think it's just really important that we focus, like I said, on sustainability and the next generations as well. So
Absolutely.
For many more to come. Well, Tyler, is there any last words or thoughts or feelings you want to share with us?
Just that I'm really happy to be here. It really is this type of research that isn't just for research's sake, but research that has an impact that helps us improve processes, improve farm practices. Really, that's close to my heart. And I can't tell you how unique that is for a company to really invest in that. It shows that Young Living cares about today, and as you said, they care about tomorrow and the future. Young Living's here for the long haul, and we want to support a planet that's here for the long haul as well.
Absolutely. And I think to kind of add to that point, one thing that I forgot is it's not a trend for us. We've been doing this ever since the beginning. And it's not just, we'll do it because it's trendy, and then when it's not trendy, we'll quit doing it. We've always been doing it because we know how important it is for us. So thank you so much for coming on once again. For those of you that would like to listen to the other episodes, go back through the library and check them out. Just type in bees in the search bar, you'll find it. And Tyler's been on here for a few other episodes as well, talking about other things. So we always love having you come on, your expertise, your knowledge, your passion, and just how amazing you are in wanting to do as much research as you possibly can. Tyler's basically publishing a paper every single week just because he loves what he does and he really cares about everything. So thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you. And until next time.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And thank you for tuning into this episode of The Wild Drop. Remember, you can listen on iTunes, Spotify, on YouTube, and our website at www.youngliving.com. Don't forget to oil up Young Living family. This is Jacob Young, dropping out. Take care.